is ended. The Atari 8-bit podcast.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kay Savetz. Here's an article from the Fresno Bee, a newspaper in Fresno, California, dated April 15, 1982. Science proves fair game to young minds. Joseph Paul Ogas, 17, has designed a cheaper way to manipulate material beneath a microscope. Garey Nishimura, 13, has evaluated the relative flammability of several household fabrics. Theirs were the big winners among the 693 projects that filled the Fresno Convention Center exhibit hall for this year's California Central Valley Science and Engineering Fair. There were other interesting projects that didn't win big, such as the effects of birth control pills on plants and determining the correlation between Canine Howling, cockroach activity, and earthquake prediction. And later, in the article's final paragraph, the reason for this interview, runners-up included Scott Ryder, a 6th grader at Ayer Elementary School. His project was titled, "Can an Atari 800 Control a Robot with Software?" Well, that's a great question. Can an Atari 800 control a robot with software? And if so, why did an awesome Atari-controlled robot only win a runner-up award at the Science and Engineering Fair? I talked with Scott to find out. This interview took place on February 21st, 2021.
A long time ago. But yeah, no. My first science fair, it was a mandatory thing in my school. You had to participate, and I've always was. I had the Atari then for I guess 3 years. I got mine in '79. I had an 800.
Oh, you were one of the first ones.
Yeah, it was one of the very first 800s. Mine had the full metal case on the inside with the little latches, not even the screws.
Yeah.
So you could actually take the lid off to add memory cartridges to it, because I got it with 16K and had to later expand it.
So, first of all, why did you get an Atari computer? Why were you, first in line for it? Were your parents into computing, or how'd that go?
My dad, he would say, was a reformed nuclear physicist. So he was a nuclear physicist working at Los Alamos on the Polaris missile program, and then decided maybe, making atomic weapons wasn't necessarily his cup of tea. And so he went into the law. So he switched over to become an attorney. I'm not sure if that's necessarily an improvement in the grand scheme, but he was always obviously very scientific in that nature. And so, yeah, as soon as Atari, we had the 2600, those kind of systems. And then as soon as Atari announced their line of home computers, he decided he was going to go that route instead of Apple II. I'm not really sure why, but so it just that Christmas of 78, 79, when the Atari was first released, one showed up. So I had the 800 with 16K and 810 disk drive, and et cetera. And then later on, we added the 825 printer and the 850 interface module to make the printer work, because you had to have them both, of course.
Yeah.
And that's what, that was the hardware that was present in my life when I had to go enter this science fair, and I got a book from my local library. I don't remember the exact title. It was something like, "You too can make a robot," or something like that. And so I kind of devoured that book, and how it was. And I said, well, hey, I could probably do this. And, I wasn't allowed to use the power tools because I was only in elementary school. Yeah. So I had to mark out the angle bar, the aluminum angle bar that I want cut. My dad would cut it. But other than that, I kind of pieced it together. It was extremely primitive, but it actually worked, in that it was a tricycle kind of pattern. So the front wheel was a drive wheel. I took an old starter motor off of a car and just friction drove the front wheel. It was just a caster where I had a spring that just held the starter motor shaft against the side of the wheel. And that was enough of a gearing reduction to actually get the thing to move. If it got stuck, you had to immediately stop, or you would actually wind up burning a hole in the wheel, because you could never overcome the motor, but you could make it so the friction wasn't enough to drive it anymore. So the wheel had some flat spots on it by an eventual point in time, but it worked. And so it did that. And then to count where the wheel was, to kind of tell speed or position, I don't know if you remember, Atari used to have, on the video, I took an old video game controller. They used to have a game called Indy 500, and it had steering controllers on it. They were like paddles, except you could actually turn them all the way around. They didn't have it wasn't a potentiometer. That had a limited range of motion. You could spin them indefinitely. And I found out you could hook those up to the 800, and I learned how the little sensors worked, what you saw, what pattern it gave you when it was going forward, what pattern it gave you when it was going backward. And so I was able to connect those up to that front wheel as well, so I could basically tell when the wheel was spinning. Because I wrote an alarm routine that basically would look for that paddle going really super fast. And I'm like, okay, wheel's spinning here, and I should stop. So it was did that. So that was distance. And then lastly, I just put another, kind of bolted that caster with the starter motor on the side of it to another motor on top of it with a potentiometer, with a paddle controller kind of thing on it. And that was steering. So you could turn that wheel 360 degrees with the top motor, and the potentiometer would tell you which way you were going. And that was full motive control. That was how the thing moved. Is it just had that front little tricycle wheel. The back two were just casters. It just kind of pulled it along wherever it wanted to go. But that front wheel did all the driving and helped me position the thing. And with that, ran a big old cable to a power supply and some control electronics that hooked up to the 850, as well as to the joystick ports. Ports 3 and 4 were the I think 3 was the sensor, the speed sensor on the front wheel, and 4 was the position steering sensor. And it could, you could drive around with a joystick, and it would run a little course and do obstacles and things like that.
So it was connected via both serial and the joystick ports. Yeah,
the off of the 850, I had to hang the motor controls because the 800 didn't have the front ports. In the 800 were great for sensing, right, but they had no power back, and so I had to wire up. Back in those days, you could go get like this huge book. I mean, it was like, I don't know, 700-800 pages of just different electronic circuits, really simple things. And there was a serial to digital serial. You basically RS-232'd in, and then convert that to digital or analog signal out. And so that's how I ran the motors. Is that I had a UART chip that was the serial converter, ran into a digital analog converter that ran a relay, and the relay is what turned the motors off and on. And so that's how you could drive around. So the 850 was basically the motor control, and then the joystick ports or the game ports on the front of the machine were the sensing for where everything was. And this big umbrella, cable.
How large was this robot unit?
Well, the base, the triangle for the base, because it's a tricycle, was 3 feet on a side. So it was just a perfectly balanced triangle. Mm-hmm. And then, to give it a little bit more personality, because it looked a bit like a triangle running around it, which wasn't very robotic or interesting. I went and found a restaurant vent. Off the top, the things they put on the roof for like the exhaust and the kitchen thing. Yeah, that was about 5 feet tall and happened to be just perfect size at the bottom, 3 feet. And so that was the outer body of the thing. And then this was the 80s, and I got a nice some plastic globe off of a lamp to give it a head. And so it was this little circular thing with the little globe head on the top. And then it started running into all kinds of things, which of course pissed off my mother because she didn't want this robot bouncing off of the walls in her house. And so at that time, Radio Shack in the good old days actually had electronic parts more than it had computers. And that's where I got most of my stuff from. But they sold a home security. I still remember this to this day. It was this really funky home security system. And what it was just a rubber mat that you put under your rug that had 2 aluminum strips with a little bit of foam tape between them. And when you stepped on it, it would compress it just enough so that the aluminum strips contacted each other. And so it was basically a long, 6 foot long contact switch. And so I wrapped that around the bottom of the body of the robot, so to speak, right where it contacted most of my mother's tables, and that became I just hit something. Of course, I couldn't tell what side. It was 360 degrees all the way around it, but I at least knew to stop. And so I like to think it was the very first kind of approach at a Roomba. Is it would bump into something and I would just reverse 180 degrees from whichever way I was going. And that seemed to work.
Wow. So this thing sounds huge and ridiculous, frankly.
Extremely huge and ridiculous, right?
Wow.
That's the whole point.
Yeah. So you controlled it directly with the joystick, or could you write like a basic program to make it run a predefined track, or how did you?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. Yeah, you could drive it with the joystick, which was kind of was mostly a comedy of errors because you couldn't actually see the front wheel. So whenever you pushed forward to go, it was anybody's guess where the thing was actually going to go. And so I quickly figured out that didn't work. And so the fire button on the joystick would reset the wheel to approximately center. So you push the fire button, hold it for a second until it stops whirring. And then okay, when you push go, you're actually going to go forward. And so that gave you the ability to roughly drive the thing. And then I also programmed patterns into it. You could put it into a big, big by 20 foot by 20 foot kind of room type thing and set some obstacles in it. And it would just roam around the room. And if it bumped into an obstacle, like I said, it would reverse and kind of go off in a different direction. And so it could try to solve the maze, but it didn't really do that because all it did is just kind of run a pattern.
So what did your parents think of this thing, besides the furniture getting all tinted?
Mom thought it was a little nuts. Dad, I think, I know now my dad was pretty proud of the whole endeavor. He was a little concerned because, I was young then, I was 12. And so, here I am, I'm working with 110 volt, off of a power supply. I'm not allowed to use the power tools. Still irks me to this day. I was not allowed to use the power tools, but he was still, there was still soldering involved and, working with sharp stuff and et cetera. But I was, reasonably well supervised while endeavoring to do all this stuff. And so, it was good. It started I entered the science fair pretty much every year since that point up until, my junior year of high school. And, had a really good time, enjoyed all the engineering and of that. And it, of course, steered me kind of into my future technology career, back way before technology was cool or interesting.
Right. All right. So what did your teachers think of this thing?
The teacher was a little flabbergasted. I did go through the whole "Did you really do this?" kind of exercise. I remember that very distinctly. And then after I convinced that was just being allowed, the way that it worked is I had to enter my school fair, and then the top 10% or whatever from my school fair would get promoted to go to the city fair, and that's where you saw the newspaper article from. Is from the city fair. So at the school fair, I had to go through the whole "Did you really do this?" thing. And then, of course, I got to the city fair, and it was even worse. And so I had to go through it all over again. But yeah, they were, I was kind of known at that point for doing these engineering kind of heavy science fair type things. Not really not science, at all. It wasn't investigating or trying to come up with a solution or things like that. I was just building stuff that was a lot of fun for me.
So how did you only get a runner-up prize? Why did this not come in first place?
I asked that later, not the same time, later in my adult life. And I was told, so the story goes something along the lines of the way that it was the day of the fair, you took everything down there and you set it up and you set up your exhibit and all that kind of good stuff. And then they kicked all the kids out I was in the lower division as only a sixth grader. Only the high school students got to stay there and talk about their projects. And so they kicked me out and they kicked all the kids out. And then, at the end of the day, they would do the judging during the day. And then you come back at night and you collect all your stuff and you go home. And then they have the awards, ceremony the next day. And so I was told, I was just sitting at home. I think I was probably playing a game, probably Archon. And then my mom came downstairs and said, we're going to go get the robot. And I said, it's too early. It's like 2:00 in the afternoon. We shouldn't be going off to get the robot now, not until 4. And he said, she basically told me, it's okay, it's fine. We'll go get the robot. And so I get down there, and of course the robot is in a complete, a total state because somebody had been trying to drive it and didn't know how to push the joystick button to reset, all that kind of good stuff. And so I sit there and I take off the top and I start unwinding it and getting ready to pack it all up. And then this whole crowd of adults just starts showing up. And I start getting questions and show me this or show me the program or why did you do it this way? And, talking about the whole project. And of course, I'm a kid. I don't know any better to know what's going on. It's like, okay, well, clearly they're the judges and they should be done by now. And then they walked off and, I heard, one of them say as he was walking away, yeah, the kid with the robot's here. And so, to some other judges walking over. And it turns out they didn't believe I did it either. And so what happened was they called the school district. I'm sorry, they called the school and said, "Hey, what's the deal here?" And the school said, "He really did." And so that's why I got down there early, is because, I had to go prove to the judges without being told I was proving to the judges that I actually had done this thing. And then at the end of it, I said, "So why?" It went pretty well. I got runner up for the whole fair. And I said, well, what can I do next time in order to win the first prize? Because I want to know why I missed it. And I was just told then, it's all fine. Don't worry about it. Just keep working. You'll do fine. I turned on later in life and they told me, well, what actually happened is they just couldn't bring themselves to give first place to a sixth grader. It set the wrong message, and to have the sixth grader beat the high school students that year. And so that was what kind of got me to be a little infamous, I guess, for lack of a better phrase.
Huh. Well, I mean, the other runner-up prize winner was, does the pullout date affect the spoilage rate of certain dairy products?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is Fresno. Fresno.
Oh, sure.
Fresno's a big agricultural town. A lot of my grand prize winning thing was on sprinklers and rain. So I learned the market.
Oh, right. Okay. So you eventually did end up winning.
Yes, I did. I won up. Because of my father and et cetera, and because of my mother's, strong support, I won. I took runner up, and then grand sweep. Then the next year they created a grand sweepstakes prize for the lower division as well. So I got both first and second in the lower division and first and second in the senior division, and then I was followed by my sister, who did exactly the same things, but she did them a grade earlier than I did, because she's really, really smart. And came and did all these, things I don't understand to this day, all very biology centric, just not something I understand. Much more mechanical.
Well, cool. Did you do any other science fair projects that involved the Atari?
I did. The one the next year was now what we would call home automation, right? It was basically using the Atari to control the lights and switches and things like that in the house. That started off with the grand vision of using writing a speech recognizer, to understand, very crude commands, and then to control the lights in the house. It quickly had to abandon that because the 850 wasn't fast enough to get the sound waves in through the digital analog circuit I did for the robot. You just kind of basically flip it around and you get analog input. The joystick ports are nowhere near fast enough. And so I figured the 850 would be fast enough, and it wasn't either. And even if I had gotten away, I started tinkering with just getting it straight into the SIO interface on the side. But even then, the processor, it just didn't have, 48K of RAM. There's just no way. So the speech recognition went out, and I made a centralized button panel. And then my mother kiboshed the whole idea of kind of rewiring some of the light switches in the house so that they were controllable by the machine.
Mom.
And so I would do it too. I would not have let me near the light switches. And so I built a model house using the same relay setup from the robot. But now it was controlling, little lights and, dollhouse kind of lights in dollhouse size rooms.
So you'd press buttons on your control panel, it would change the lights in the house.
Yep. And, this stuff we all take for, program like at 7:00 in the morning, it would turn on the radio, the fictional radio, which was just the Atari playing some music. And then it would, and then turn on the lights in the bedroom, and, at dinner time, it'd, adjust all the settings for that kind of stuff.
Wow. So this was 7th grade?
This was 7th grade. Yep.
And how did that do in the science fair?
That's the one that won the whole thing. I don't know if they were just making up for the year before because it wasn't that interesting. Oh, actually, no, that didn't. I take it back. No, that didn't. I got that one wrong. That one only got me top 10% because I'm a horrendous speller. I cannot spell to save my life. Still can't. And I did not have time to get all the spelling errors out of the software that you would use because it was displaying on the Atari screen. Mm-hmm. It would display, messages and, news feeds and things like that, of course, which were all fictional. But I remember that now.
How exciting.
Spelling. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Spelling. Spell correctors are the greatest things in the whole world.
So did you do any other projects with the Atari science fair, or not? Just anything else that you played with?
Science fair and non-science fair, I was an avid gamer. I loved that. I obviously programmed a bunch. I never entered anything in like First Star or any of those, those kind of things that Atari ran back then. I always dreamed of doing it, but just never had the time.
Oh, Atari Program Exchange?
Yep, the APX.
Yeah.
And I remember First Star Software I think he was the guy that won the first APX year.
Right, Fernando.
They did it. Yep. And no, was always very jealous. But I looked at what he did. That scroller. I forgot what it was called, Bomber or something. But you had a little ship and you were kind of flying down a canyon, bombing things on the side as you went. Mm-hmm. And I just was severely impressed with that because it was the smooth scrolling was just something I had never figured out how to do at that time. And just that something else like, okay, I can't really, I'm not going to be able to keep up with that in the time that I have. And so I'm going to go I'll keep doing the robotic / interfacing stuff. So I played with other things, other projects. But unfortunately for my Atari career, that is when we picked up an Apple II. And the Apple II is significantly more expandable than from a tinkering perspective than the Atari was. But really enjoyed the Atari. Better architected machine, certainly better graphics capability.
Yeah. But you mentioned Archon. So what other games were you playing?
I was a huge EA fan, right? Mm-hmm. So it would be Archon and Mule were ones I really, really enjoyed. I'm trying to remember. It's so long. Miner 2049er.
Sure.
What was pole position when it came out? But you had to do the whole. I forget what you need to do to get the better graphics out of it because I didn't have the fancy graphics chips because I had the first gen hardware.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
You had to do the graphics upgrade on the chip. Replace, I think it was Pokey. No, Pokey Sound.
The GTAA chip.
Yes.
Yours probably had the CTAA chip.
I had CTIA and I had to get GTIA. That's right. So I did that. The other things I did in just my Atari history is there was a local computer / video game repair shop, and I was they hired me. The owner hired me. Is my first job, so to speak, to go back there, and I was repairing 2600s and things like that. He did the computers, but I did the video game consoles. And I distinctly remember whenever a customer came in, I had to go make sure I was not visible because he didn't want the customers to see there was just a kid in the back fixing stuff. But I know to this day, I know how to diagnose a 2600.
Nice.
Yep.
Nice. Neat. So you just extra, just walking around town money for fixing
college.
College money. Yeah.
Yeah,
just
college money.
Fixing.
I was not allowed to spend it. Yeah. No, just fixing 2600s. Very very cool, robust hardware. Especially, it was fun to see it go through its revisions, right? Where you have the solid metal shielding when Atari was dealing with all the FCC rules and et cetera, and then it became significantly less solid over time as the rules got more friendly.
Right. Flimsier and flimsier.
Flimsier and flimsier. Yep.
Do you have any of your old code or anything anymore?
I still have my old code. It's very, I have retro computing is something that's just personally very interesting. So I've collected it. I have emulators for like all the hardware I had and all the hardware I lusted over but never actually got. And so for those, and I run those on my Mac, and then I basically have most of my old code, archived off into those things. It's pretty scary, right? I can put the emulator, every single piece of software I ever had, and still have half of the space left over on a 4 gigabyte thumb drive.
Right.
It's just kind of depressing how much it's evolved in so many times.
Great. Well, normally I have to just beg people send me your floppy disks and I'll archive your old code, but you've done it and good for you. I love talking to geeks. So people who remained geeky.
Yeah. It's hard. You can take I've like to say I've always been living in Silicon Valley, even if I actually haven't been living here, because I've been involved in computing 40 years now, 43 years, something like that.
So what do you do today?
Today I work for Facebook. So actually, I guess I work for WhatsApp. So I run the engineering function that builds the WhatsApp clients that people use, not the servers. And it's a lot of fun. But I've been bumming around the valley since '96. Yeah, I got here in '96. And I was with Apple for 15 years. I did a stint with Sun Microsystems. I've worked for Netflix. I worked for Nook. Before that, I've just kind of been doing the technology thing. My grand plan on graduating college was, I'll go play in technology for a year or two, and then I'll go off and be an attorney. And that didn't really hold.
So what haven't I asked you about your Atari days that I should have?
Well, my favorite piece of gear, my Atari device that I treasured the most, was actually my Atari acoustic 300 baud modem. Mm-hmm. That was the thing it took the most. A printer I could easily sell to the parents for word processing and all the things you need a printer for, programming, etc. But the modem was something they never understood the purpose of. What do you want this thing for? And I distinctly remember the first time I discovered, CompuServe and some of the online bulletin boards where you could actually exchange code you wrote or send stuff off and other people would help you debug it, and et cetera. It was just an eye-opening experience for me about wow, you can socialize through this. You can actually get real work done through this. And it was all the quiet, I was relegated to the basement when I was working because it was just where there's lots of room and et cetera down there. It was, it was a semi-finished basement. So it wasn't cold or bad. But I always had to hang a sign or a little on the post of the door into the room above the basement, because whenever anybody would go walking through that room, it'd be loud enough that it could screw up my modem session.
Oh.
And of course the phone lines. This was the day of acoustic.
Right.
Yep.
Oh.
So it was always quiet. I'm working.
Working.
Yeah. Sometimes it was working. Not always. Sometimes it was working. Nice. Yeah. So that was my favorite piece of Atari gear. And really, I held on to that machine and all of that stuff I only probably got rid of it about 15 years ago when I moved last time. Still worked. Still was hanging in. Even the 810, the drive door had delaminated from the lever that lifted up the disk mechanism, so I had to re-glue that. But other than that, that machine was robust. They built that first batch of units they built. I'm convinced you could drive over that thing with a car and it'd be fine. It was a seriously tough machine.
Yeah. Cool. So if you could send a message to the people who are still using their Atari computers today, mm-hmm. and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Keep going. I still fire up my emulator. I'm in many ways I'm jealous. I wish I still had my original hardware, because that machine was just, there's so many memories, so much that we take for granted now was stuff you had to do yourself, and it was just such a sense of accomplishment when you could actually, make it do something really truly useful, and it just enjoy it. Just absolutely enjoy it. Don't get rid of it. Don't do what I did. It's not worth the space. I'm sorry. It's not worth saving the space. It's not worth getting the space back.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.